To the Auditor General, does the PSPC need a court order from the RCMP to share their findings and suspicions?
It's my understanding that anyone can refer a matter to law enforcement, but
This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome to all of you who are joining us today. I'm, of course, subbing in as the Shadow Minister for Public Services and Procurement. I want to go directly to the Auditor General's report, where she acknowledged that CBSA was engaging PSPC on the development of ArriveCAN. This is correct?
Mr. Chair, PSPC was engaged to put in place contracts for IT services.
How often were you engaged with CBSA on this project in particular?
In terms of our understanding, the department was involved in both putting in place new contracts and issuing task authorizations against 31 contracts.
So how often would you have communicated with CBSA on this project?
At my level or as a department?
As a department.
I think in the early 2020, our procurement officers would have had fairly frequent interaction with their CBSA counterparts to put in place the initial set of contracts. Thank
you very much. When did you first learn about GC Strategies getting contracts on ArriveCAN?
Myself personally, I would have said probably later in 2020 when I would have seen a kind of consolidated report around contracts for COVID efforts.
Just, Ms. Buck, I just want to interrupt for a second. I'm going to remind all the witnesses that you're here speaking on behalf of the department. This is an issue I've noticed where people are kind of personalizing answers, and we're looking for departmental answers. So just if you could just bear that in mind. I just want to flag that early at the outset. I think it's important that we get kind of the most fulsome answers possible about contacting communication. So if you could just kind of
I apologize, Mr. Chair. So certainly the procurement officials would have known immediately that there was a contract being put in place with GC Strategies, which would have been in the spring of 2020.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that, Chair. I will frame my questions as such as well. Did PSPC raise any concerns about GC Strategies prior to the contracting costs becoming public?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. To my knowledge, the questions were asked in terms of what was the rationale for choosing GC Strategies, why would CBSA looking to have a sole source contract, more about that, not so much as a criticism of the firm, but more trying to understand why the use of a non-competitive contract was required.
So I'm hearing that there were not any concerns about a two-person company being awarded a contract of this magnitude.
Mr. Chair, as I understand it, there was not concerns raised around GC Strategies as they had previously provided IT services and were already on existing supply arrangements with the Government of Canada.
So is it common for the government to contract two-person companies working out of a basement, receiving millions of dollars in government contracts?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. When we establish supply arrangements and standing offers, there's a requirement for companies to demonstrate that they have provided services, and in particular a certain number of contracts and a certain volume of kind of IT services in the past. And GC Strategies and other companies to get on those instruments would have to demonstrate that they had met those capabilities in the past.
I just want to push back a little bit on that answer. It is my understanding that GC Strategies has no expertise in IT. They do not provide those services, but what they do is act as a middle person to find those resources. So I'll just leave that there. So is PSPC satisfied? Were you and do you continue to be satisfied with the selection of GC Strategies for this project?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to kind of look at it from the perspective of they were engaged to do work. There was work that was completed. There was an application that was built. I really wouldn't be able to talk to the quality in their delivering on tasks and on the specific pieces, but we are aware that they did actually engage IT professionals, and those IT professionals were able to build an app and to do new releases and make sure that that app was available on multiple platforms.
Thank you very much. My final question for you, are you familiar with the term bait and switch? This is something that was raised by the procurement ombudsman and certainly a prevalency in the practice of procurement. Are you familiar with that term?
Mr. Chair, yes, I'm familiar with the term.
Okay, so understanding that typically it would be where a company identifies certain resources that will be working on a project and then changes them out for other resources that may not have the same level of expertise or skill.
So, Mr. Chair, what I can say is it is not uncommon for there to be a time gap between the time when companies have to make their submission as part of a procurement process and when a task authorization is issued for a piece of work, particularly for multi-stage IT projects. So in those cases, there may be resources that are available at the time of bidding that would be willing to do the work. There can be a passage of time before you get into a later stage of a project where you need to engage those resources and they're no longer available because there's been a length of time.
So I'll quickly ask, are you aware that in the task authorization forms, resources may be used that don't have the same level of expertise as initially identified?
Mr. Chair, under the procurement process and the rules, it is possible to replace a resource, but you are to replace them with someone of equal or greater skill and technical capabilities.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to the witnesses, and thank you for your attendance. To PSPC representatives, your Deputy Minister, Ariane Reza, was appointed November 2nd of 2023. Prior to that, she was the Assistant Deputy Minister. Beginning in August of 21, she was the Senior Official responsible for federal procurement. She oversaw 1,400 employees in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. She led the urgent procurement of critical goods and services to ensure the health and safety of Canadians, involving vaccines and surrounding protective equipment. She directed the development and implementation for the simplification of procurement practices. These efforts focused on building an accessible procurement system that drives value for money. Her DNA was all over the issues that we are studying today and have studied literally for the last couple of months. Why isn't she here?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. She had pre-planned leave for this week, and she's not available this week. Otherwise, she was originally scheduled to be here last week, and the meeting was changed, so she was unfortunately unable to.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I look forward to a further invite to Ms. Reza to attend this particular committee to answer some relevant questions surrounding these concerns. Now, on the bait and switch, to you, Mr. Mills. You've identified an understanding of bait and switch as presented by my colleague, Ms. Block. I want to do a little more pushback because prior to Ms. Block bringing to your attention the real entity behind GC Strategies and the business that they are in, you repeatedly used the phrase, well, they've been in several government contracts providing IT services. That is so inaccurate. The directors of GC Strategies themselves, the principals behind it, Christian Firth, made it abundantly clear on numerous occasions they have no expertise in IT. They are simply an external consultant who contracts with the Government of Canada to find IT professionals, which is really an offensive move, particularly when you take a look at the size of the federal public service that Justin Trudeau has increased by 40% since 2015. Last week at the Ethics Committee, we heard from Jennifer Carr, the president of the Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada, who oversees our professional IT federal public servants, and they are rightly angered, very angry at the Government of Canada for simply bypassing their skills, their expertise in-house. You're certainly aware of that, are you not, Mr. Mills?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'm aware that there is a debate about what is the capability of IT workers in the government. Again, in the use of external resources, many dialogues we've had with various departments have indicated that there are lots of times when there are very specific skill sets that just aren't available within the public service.
GC Strategies has no skills. There is nothing preventing from the government of Canada with this massive federal public servants to actually do Google searches on their own to find IT professionals. Why is it a two-person company working out of their basement is allowed to collect $20 million over the course of 3 years for doing absolutely nothing? If we were talking to professionals from the private sector right now, people would be fired for this. There would be accountability for this gross breach of the public trust. And I'm going to ask this question because I bet no one at the PSPC has been suspended with or without pay. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'll start with the first part about the use of external consultants is also used in the private sector, and I would note I will acknowledge that GC Strategies, the two principles of the company, are their business model is to make available IT professionals.
We're going to move on. Now, on the issue of bait and
15,
switch,
okay,
we've
go ahead.
identified criminality, we've identified fraud, forgery, obstruction of justice, breach of trust by government officials. All surrounding the use of GC Strategies and the contracting practices. Have you reported anything to the RCMP at this point? And why not if you haven't?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'll turn to my Assistant Deputy Minister of the Oversight Branch.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. We're taking all the reports that we're getting very seriously. So we had access to the CBSA reports, the Auditor General report.
Report to the RCMP, yes
Thank
or no?
you. We'll have to come back to this.
Can she answer that question, Chair?
I'm afraid that the time is well up, but there'll be many more rounds here.
I'm going to circle back to my last question to you. I set it up in terms of identifying various potential criminal charges that could be investigated. We've heard evidence directly from the source, Christian Firth, who openly admitted to committee members that he actually altered, changed resumes without consent, without permission of the resume owners. That is a form of forgery. We've heard evidence of inflated invoices, again by GC Strategies. Subcontractors doing no work. We heard from the procurement ombudsman that 76% of subcontractors perform no work, yet we're still receiving government monies, taxpayer monies. Missing documents, several, probably thousands of pages of missing documents as identified by the Auditor General. In fact, her point is what's really concerning is what the audit does not reveal. And what it doesn't reveal is either, in my opinion, incompetence or corruption. Given all the red flags of criminality, of fraud, forgery, obstruction of justice, and breach of trust by government officials, have you made a referral to the RCMP based on all of the information you've heard to date?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So as you mentioned, we are gathering all the information that are put in front of us. This includes what has been said in that committee. It includes the conclusion of the report from the Auditor General. It also includes what we have heard through OPO. We're gathering all that information and we are analyzing it right now. We need to see if the allegations are supported by other evidence.
That's not your job, ma'am. With all due respect, that is not your job. That is the job of our professional law enforcement officers. Your job is, if you have a suspicion of criminal wrongdoing, your job is to report that to the legal authorities. Clearly, you must have a suspicion of wrongdoing with respect to what's going on here in ArriveCan, yes or no?
We are doing analysis. And
Do you have a suspicion, ma'am?
As soon as we will find evidence in our documents.
That's not your job, ma'am. Ma'am, that is not your job. You are not an agent of the RCMP. You are a public servant. I'll ask the question again. After everything that I've identified, everything that you have read in the AG's report, do you have a suspicion of wrongdoing? Yes or no?
We have sufficient suspicion to
Thank you.
start.
I'll move on. Thank you. Now, to you, Mr. Mills. I asked this question yesterday to officials at PACP. Again, you're speaking on behalf of your particular department. During the course of the implementation of the ArriveCan, the 177 different versions of ArriveCan, were there regular and consistent communications between the deputy minister and the minister responsible for this portfolio? I've identified at least 3 ministers, Anita Anand, Philomena Tassi, and Alina Jazik. Were there regular and consistent communications between the DM and those ministers?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. During the first part of the pandemic, there were definitely regular communications between the Deputy Minister, senior officials, and the Minister regarding the Government of Canada's overall COVID response and procurements writ large in support of that response.
Were there regular and consistent communications with the PCO, the Privy Council Office?
There were regular interdepartmental meetings led by the PCO, again, discussing overall the kind of Government of Canada's response to COVID and procurement.
And most likely the person at PCO you were speaking with would be the clerk of the Privy Council, who reports to the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I would have to take back to what degree our deputies were involved in the interdepartmental. There was certainly a number of ADM level committees that were managed.
And for the Canadians out there watching this live or afterwards who are not familiar with the PCO, which minister is responsible for the PCO?
Thank you for the question. The Privy Council office would ultimately report into the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much.
You know, first and foremost, I want to say how disappointed I am that we did not take care of taxpayer dollars better, that we really had a lackluster and a faulty system for procurement, and ultimately it was taxpayers and taxpayer dollars that suffered from this. And I am trying to understand a little bit better as to how that procurement process works, if that's okay. So, I mean, last week we saw some wide variations on the amount of money that GC Strategies has received in contracts over the years. And there is confusion around how these contracts are reported to the government.
GC Strategies does their business. They're a middleman, correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm aware.
Are you satisfied with the selection of GC Strategies with value for money for Canadians in mind? Are you satisfied?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I wouldn't be able to speak to the value for money because I did not observe the...
Well, you said that they're changing processes at PSPC. Are you changing the processes because they were really good before and you want to make them worse? Or were they not good before and you're making them better?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As obviously we've had 2 reports, the one from the Office of the Procurement Ombudsman, one from the Office of the Auditor General, which has clearly pointed that there are many areas for improvement, and we're making changes to improve.
So the app was supposed to cost $80,000. Were red flags raised to the minister when costs hit $1 million? Yes or no?
Mr. Chair, to whose minister?
To the minister responsible for your department.
Thank you for the question. Mr. Chair, we put in place contracts.
And for clarity, sir, all of my questions have to deal with you, with your ministry that you're here on behalf of.
We put in place contracts. We were not project management. We did not have an awareness of what the overall project budget is, or all the totality of contracts.
Did you ask?
So we were not aware.
Did you ask what the budget was?
Thank you for the question. As a department, we were focused on what are the goods and services they need, and those were the questions. We were focused on providing those.
So it was supposed to cost $80,000. It hit $1 million. It hit $5 million. It hit $10 million. It hit $25 million. It hit $30 million, 45, 60, at least $60 million, because the paper shredders must have been running, and there's not documents to demonstrate what the actual costs were for this thing. It's been raised, of course, that it was only 2 people working for GC Strategies, and they were pocketing this kind of money. You know, you talked about the value of them being able to build a team. You know, for the same price that just the GC Strategies portion of the Arrive scam cost, you could hire 10 public servants to work for 25 years. And instead we got these geniuses who are taking 30% of this $20 million contract and potentially $258 million more. Obviously, you said you're not going to be able to speak to the value for money. We heard that from the Auditor General. It doesn't exist in this case. How many other 2-person middlemen contractors are there that PSPC is allowing to do contracting for the Government of Canada? Just the number. How many others?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I could not comment on the numbers of suppliers that are using, or if there are other suppliers basically running a 2-people.
Can you undertake to provide that information to the committee in writing after your appearance?
We'll take note of the question.
Will you undertake to provide the information to the committee?
To the extent that we can provide the information, for sure.
So that we're going to
that's an acceptable answer.
We're going to register that as a yes. Mr. Mills, can the minister, your minister, get the money back that was paid out in this crystal clear case of contracting abuse? To be very specific, money paid to GC Strategies for their work on the failed Arrive scam. Does the minister have the power to get that money back?
Thank you. Maybe I'll turn to our CFO to.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I think normally I think if, and I can speak on behalf of our department in the situation where if our department was a party to a contract where we did not get services that were supposed to be delivered, we would absolutely have the right to go after a party to recover the funds. So
Is this an example of an opportunity for Canadians to get some of their money back from GC Strategies?
I can't speak to the particular case. I think
is that because you haven't looked, or because you're not sure?
So I'm speaking on behalf of PSBC, where we contract services for ourselves. I think in this case, in the particular case, we're talking about GC Strategies, and
we are. And let me. I've got very limited time. I got 15 seconds left. They forged the credentials that they used to win the bid. If that's not a disqualifying criteria for someone to continue to receive work, but also if it doesn't mean that we don't get the money back because they got it under false pretenses, what does? Is forgery and fraud enough for the minister to get their money back, to get Canadians' money back? Yes or no?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I think that is one of the questions that is being looked at, and I think when that determination is made, the appropriate authorities will be involved, as my colleague Catherine Poulin has indicated.
Thank you very much. That is your time.
Me, that the government contracting system in Canada is badly broken. We have officials here today responsible for the department that oversees government contracting. Now, with Arrive scam, we have a situation in which a tiny company, GC Strategies, with no ability to do anything, can get hundreds of millions in contracts and then subcontract. The Auditor General found that the process was actually rigged in favor of this company, and we heard at the Government Operations Committee that this company broke the law by systematically altering resumes in order to get deals. The Procurement Ombudsman found further that the system was built to help insiders get contracts and to push those contractors to charge the government more. Frankly, these aren't just Arrive scam issues. These are systematic issues. You're the department responsible for overseeing contracting. With this systematic incompetence, corruption, perhaps both, that we're seeing, what would you say to Canadians who look at your department and say, have you guys become totally useless, given that these things could happen and you're supposed to be watching and they happened anyways?
Mr. Chair, for the question. What I would say to Canadians is that the procurement system is very complex. It has become more complex over years from a number of drivers, international trade agreements, a number of rules.
Sorry, I am going to press the point, though. The question isn't whether or not it's complex. The question is whether your department is doing anything, whether your department is adding value. If you were able to allow this kind of corruption, incompetence, or both in the procurement process, if it just happened while you were there, was your department adding any value? Was it doing anything in the process?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I was about to say was, given this complexity, we have processes, procurement processes that are complex to try and deal with kind of rules, regulations, and whatnot. What we are doing, and what our strong effort is to make procurement simpler, so it's more open to small, medium-sized enterprises across this country, particularly diverse suppliers across this country. By making it more simple, making it more accessible, we will get better value for Canadians.
Okay, that doesn't really answer the question, though. In fact, the Procurement Ombudsman's report shows that the system was built to preference insiders because you had to have pre-existing experience with the Government of Canada in order to get those bids. So I'm not getting a clear answer to what your department does. Just maybe moving it up to the minister. What does Minister Duclos do as Minister of Procurement? Is he responsible for what happened here? Was he seeking briefings on GC strategies? What is he doing in his role or not doing?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Typically, our procurement authority kind of is delegated from the minister down to departmental officials, and the vast majority of our procurement activity is authorized, managed, and overseen by departmental officials. There would be a handful of individual procurements that would invoke the authorities of the minister for actual approval, and there would be a number.
Okay, so when was he first briefed on GC strategies then?
Thank you for the question. I would have to take back take under advisement what briefings and the timing for Minister Duclos.
You will undertake to provide an answer in writing to this committee within 7 days, correct?
I will undertake to provide a response. I'm not sure that I can meet 7 days.
It's typically 14 before we start.
Okay,
before we send reminders, but yes.
14 days. You'll provide that information?
Yes.
When Minister Duclos was briefed about ArriveCan, about GC strategies, as well as previous ministers. Will you also undertake to give the committee a complete list of all pre-qualified contractors within the same timeline?
Thank you for the question. You mean on which contract?
All pre-qualified contractors, people that have the GC strategies process available to them.
So all the supply who's pre-qualified on the supply arrangements?
You must have a list.
Okay.
Thank you. Within 14 days.
Briefly, Mr.
Thank you. These aren't just ArriveCan issues. These are systematic issues. Why did your department allow this to happen? And again, what value are you providing in the process?
If you can just provide a brief answer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure why our department allows what to happen.
We'll come back. No, Mr. Genuis, you started your question at the time, and I allowed you to finish it.
Thank you.
There will be another opportunity for one of your members. Monsieur.
In a report, the Auditor General said, quote, our review of task authorizations that were issued by the Canada Border Service Agency and co-signed by Public Service and Procurement Canada, we found 2 resources being charged at the rate that required a minimum of 10 years of experience, even though the resources did not have this level of experience, end quote. In a word, what would you, or a phrase, how would you characterize that, Mr. Mills? Is that an example of bait and switch, or is that fraud? What is that?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Certainly, it is a requirement of those that are administering those contracts to ensure that the people being put forward meet the minimum requirements. So in that case, they should have verified that if the requirement was 10 years, that the individual had it.
So it's fraud. They lied about the worker's experience to charge a higher rate, right?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not in a position to opine whether it's fraud.
But are you in a position to say whether or not it was honest? My question is it a lie? Because the Auditor General wasn't opining. She analyzed the information and determined that what was said, what was signed off on, was not true. A minimum of 10 years experience that did not exist. So is that honest or dishonest?
Again, thank you, Mr. Chair, but I would not be able to opine whether honesty or dishonesty or administrative error.
Okay. Well, that might be part of the problem. If we have a basic misunderstanding of what is honest and what is dishonest, I think that maybe we should take a separate look at that. 76% of the time, the procurement ombuds found that named resources did not do the work that was stated at the skill level that was required. You said that the skill level of replacement workers had to match that of the workers who were originally authorized to do the work. Has an audit or review been done to ensure that that is the case, having just noted that there was fraud committed as outlined by the Auditor General in the case I mentioned?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do believe the procurement ombudsman said 76% of names that were proposed at the bidding stage did not subsequently do work or have work billed against it. This is something that we are very focused with in terms of when people are being proposed, so that we ensure that those being proposed are most likely to do the work and verify that they do the work.
When they bait the hook with the skill set that they say that they're offering, and then they switch it out and they make sure that they get the maximum price possible and the Canadians get the least value possible. This is something that we would expect that your department is safeguarding against. Ms. Hogan, is it common practice across government contracting that high-priced consultants do carry out a bait and switch, as has been identified in the procurement ombudsman's work, where they present experienced workers to get the contract and charge a higher rate when they actually swap them out for less experienced workers that can pay less, and then they pocket the difference?
Well, I can't comment on whether it's common practice. I can tell you that we saw it in some of the samples that we looked at where an individual, the contract called for 10 years of experience or more, and that's the individual who performed the work was not that way. But there is a mechanism in place in the public service when an individual who's put forward under a contract or a task authorization needs to be switched, and that should have happened, and we did not see that happening.
Thank you very much. My time to Mr. Brock, please.
You have a minute and a half.
To the Auditor General, does the PSPC need a court order from the RCMP to share their findings and suspicions?
It's my understanding that anyone can refer a matter to law enforcement, but typically we wait for law enforcement to ask us for a production order to provide evidence.
And there'd be nothing stopping them from doing that today, for instance, would there? To share their suspicions?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. Now, only under a Justin Trudeau government would public servants get a bonus for failing so badly. It's been discovered that PACP paid out $340,000 in bonuses. How much in hundreds of thousands of dollars were paid out to PSPC?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I do not have the specific number about how much performance pay was paid out to executives. It's a normal part of the compensation package for executives within the Government of Canada. And it's paid.
Were bonuses paid out during the Arrive scam fiasco, yes or no?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. During the years of the government's COVID response, there were executives within the Department of PSPC that did receive performance pay.
Did Deputy Minister
has been published on the website? And
did Deputy Minister Reza receive a bonus?
Mr. President, I would not be able to speak to.
And you'll provide to the committee details of who received bonuses and what quantum, please, within 14 days?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have already provided information on the performance pay that is paid by our department is publicly available on the website, and we'll provide the links for that information.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid that is your time for today. I don't think I'll have any opposition to adjourning this meeting, so we can all get back to work. So thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned.